Well, here it is. I don't mean to advertise it. It's been quite welcome, Susan, first of all.
Hi.
It's wonderful
Good
to have
evening,
you
everyone.
Here. Yeah. I told you this crowd would like you. Congratulations. You've hit the New York Times bestseller list.
Thank you.
A couple little highlights from the book tour. We now know that Susan thinks she's a better tennis player than Barack Obama.
I don't just think.
You don't, okay. And how did you?
But a much worse basketball player.
Okay, how did you discern the tennis? I mean, really?
I watched him play.
Have you played him?
I didn't need to play him.
Okay. And I guess another highlight of the book tour so far is a Twitter feed that ended, when I last read it, with the words crickets. What was that all about?
You know, I'm minding my own business, walking off the stage after Bill Maher on Friday. And one of the producers comes up to me and says, you know, the president just tweeted about you. And I said, well, what did he say? And I read the tweet, and, you know, yada, yada, she's a disaster, she should shut up, shouldn't talk about Syria, blah, blah, blah. You know, she was responsible, she was national security advisor when Obama didn't, you know, bomb Syria in 2013. I'm like, okay. So, of course, you know, I had to respond.
Of course you did. We know you. Yeah.
So I said, then why did you come up to me at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in 2015, 2 years after this so-called red line, and hug me when you'd never met me before, which was totally gross, and whisper in my ear that I had been very unfairly treated over Benghazi and that I was doing a great job for the country? And he didn't respond.
Crickets. So it was fascinating reading your book because you grew up in such a kind of a powerhouse, really. I mean, your father was an economist who went on to become a governor on the Federal Reserve. Your mom was so distinguished. She was known as the mother of Pell Grants. But to me, the two moments really stand out in your life. One is that the fact that your parents met at a Federal Reserve dinner. And the other one was that family friend Madeleine Albright used to refer to you as Little Susie Rice.
Yeah, she still
and you were bothered
sometimes.
by that.
I don't like it. I don't like it. Didn't like it when I was little.
You didn't like that at all.
No, I did. I had wonderful parents, but you know they had come from very humble origins. Each of them. My mother was the daughter of immigrants who came from Jamaica to Portland, Maine in 1912. And my grandfather was a janitor and my grandmother was a maid. Neither of them had any education, but they sent all 5 of their kids to college. My 4 uncles, 2 were doctors, 1 an optometrist, 1 a university president, and then my mother was the youngest. And yes, she was the mother of Pell Grants, about which I'm so proud. 80 million Americans have been able to attend college because of the Pell Grant program. But for this audience, it should be known that she sat on 11 major corporate boards and was obviously one of the first African-American women in that generation to do so, and was herself a corporate executive at the end of her career.
And your childhood, it looked privileged from the outside. You went to a privileged school. You ended up at Stanford, Rhodes Scholar. You know, you're kind of
is that privilege, or is that...
That's yeah, you're not exactly a loser, shall we say. It was but your childhood was tough because your parents went through a very contentious divorce. And you write about that in a book, and I was wondering how that shaped you going forward.
Well, I do. This book is both very much a personal story, my family history, my upbringing here in Washington, D.C. in the 60s and 70s, my story as a mother and a daughter of aging parents at that time, my marriage, all this stuff, in addition to being a policy book. But I'm pretty raw in explaining what happened between my parents, because as wonderful and accomplished as they were, they really had no business being married. And they went through a very violent, ugly separation. And when I was 7 years old or thereabouts, until the time they physically separated when I was about 10, I lived in a household that was a tinderbox, and I'd try to be going to sleep at night, and they'd be screaming and yelling, and stuff would be flying, and I'd be awakened in the middle of the night, and I'd have to come downstairs and sort of spy on them. And if it looked like it was getting out of control, I'd have to intervene physically, or if not physically, try to, hear both sides out and literally mediate. And that obviously was not what you would want ideally for a 7-year-old. Yeah. But I felt that, my little brother was 2 years behind me. If I didn't do it, who was going to do it? And it was really scary. So what I got out of that was, one, a realization that I could overcome a really difficult and painful situation, which was my home life. And then their custody battle went on another 5 years after they split in a very public way. And so I learned, even though my friendships initially suffered, that I could be resilient, that I could work on these things, that I could still be a good student. And then inadvertently, I learned some mediating skills that came back to be useful.
And you were described and you were described by your tennis coach as fiercely competitive and a sore loser. And you kind of copped to that.
I do. I try to be less a sore loser, but I don't like to lose. I like to win.
Okay. You are competitive and athletic. I can see that. So again, Stanford, Rhodes Scholar, you were in the Clinton administration, Assistant Secretary of State, an NSC staffer. And we're just going to flash forward only because the time is short, as you pointed out rightly backstage. You joined the Obama administration. You latched on with President Obama as a candidate instead of Hillary Clinton, which was an interesting piece in the book. But what's interesting about you were there with the Obama administration all those years, and there's one word that attached to you like an ugly bug, Benghazi. How many here, raise your hand if you could actually explain what Benghazi was? Oh, of course, Alan could. Oh, that's fascinating.
That's not many.
That's fascinating. So, and it affected your life and kept you from becoming Secretary of State. September 11th, 2012, correct? Do I have the date right?
Yes.
Terrorist attack on a diplomatic compound in Benghazi, Libya.
4 Americans.
4 Americans were killed. And you are sent out to talk about it on Sunday talk shows, blaming it not as a terrorist attack, but as a protest against a video, correct?
You're not explaining it right.
I'm not explaining it right. Okay, you explain it quickly. But let me get back. But what was interesting about it is that your mother said, "Why isn't Hillary Clinton going on?" She said, "I smell a rat." And it turned out it really was something that hurt you. But go ahead and explain.
Well, you've got most of it. I went out on the 5 Sunday shows at the request of the White House when Secretary Clinton and probably a couple others had declined to go out. I said yes, not because that's how I intended to spend my weekend. I was taking my kids to Ohio State for a Big Ten football game. That was my plan. But having been asked and feeling that I was part of a team and this was a moment of crisis, I wasn't thinking about myself. I was thinking about, the mission and the mandate, and I said yes. But my mother, who warned me on the Friday night before the Sunday not to go out, had an intuition even after just suffering a stroke following her 4th or 5th cancer surgery that this was not likely to pan out well. I used the information that was provided to me and others by the intelligence community. That was our latest best information. It turned out to be wrong in one critical respect, which was that there was not a demonstration at our facility in Benghazi prior to the attack on our compound and the loss of our 4 colleagues. But out of that, I was branded a liar, I was branded incompetent, and in the middle of a campaign season and a political hothouse,
and
my name became
what did you
synonymous.
learn out of that?
Well, first of all, I don't know that it cost me the Secretary of State job I withdrew my name from consideration as one of at least 2 people that the president was considering.
You don't think it cost you the job?
Well, I did it because I withdrew. What I mean to say is I don't know that President Obama would have decided to appoint me. So I can't say that I had it and I lost it. What I did do was decide to withdraw my name from consideration.
Got it.
You know, what did I learn? I learned a lot. One thing is listen to your mother. You know. And I remind my kids that all the time, right? Another is that, you know, in this hothouse of, you know, political combat, that the first person to go out in a crisis, when inevitably the information is going to change, is going to be attacked not just because of the message he or she conveys, but as a messenger. But I also learned some other more personal lessons from the experience, which have to do with being willing to ask other people for help. I'm not good inherently at asking for help. Direction's okay, but you know, big stuff, harder for me. And had I been more willing to do that, and had I been more deliberate in, you know, cultivating allies in the press or wherever, I think I might have weathered that storm. It would have still been a storm, but weathered it a bit more smoothly.
And just briefly, your daughter was affected by it.
My daughter was, and my mom actually. My mom, who could not turn off cable television, was just tortured by seeing her daughter, about whom she was proud very nicely, you know, pilloried and maligned, particularly my integrity being maligned. And that was very painful. And my daughter, who was 9 years old at the time, unbeknownst to me and my husband, she was absorbing what was going on in the television. And she began to hallucinate. And you know, seeing images of men come out of walls at her, and we were terrified. And we took her to Children's Hospital here in Washington for several weeks of tests to figure out, you know, did she have a brain tumor, which was one concern? Was she experiencing psychosis or schizophrenia, a vision problem? And they finally ruled out all the worst case scenarios and concluded that it was a stress reaction to what I was experiencing. And, you know, I include that in the book, as personal as it is, with her permission. She's now a very healthy, happy, thriving, almost 17-year-old.
That's wonderful.
So that's the good news. But I include it because I want to make the point that whether you're on one side of the political spectrum or the other, that this pernicious politics of personal destruction that is so common here in Washington is not cost-free. You know, it's not just the target who is affected. It's the people who love the target and work with the target and support him or her. And even innocents like a 9-year-old kid who didn't sign up for this, even if I did.
We are out of time. In 60 seconds, tell us, and you can't say the word Donald Trump, what worries you most in the foreign policy landscape?
Why can't I say that?
You can't say it.
Okay, well, that's the truthful answer. Honestly, I'm not being flip. That is the truthful answer. We have a commander-in-chief who's erratic, untruthful, and unpredictable. And that's not what you need in an American president. I could talk about, you know, India and Pakistan could go to nuclear war. We could have a pandemic flu. Russia could, you know, take another bite out of Europe. We could have an inadvertent conflict with China. All those are real. But if you ask me my number one, it's what you ruled out.
Susan, thank you for visiting with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
On your book club.
Thank you.